Hello and welcome to another episode of Nothing Ventured with me, Aarish Shah. Today in the studio with me, I had an incredible conversation with Roger Wade. Roger is the founder of Boxfresh and Boxpark, two iconic British consumer brands. Boxpark, the pop-up mall built from shipping containers, became a cultural landmark in East London, redefining the intersection of retail, food and community. Roger scaled it to tens of millions in profitable revenue before exiting to LDC, gifting 10% of his earnout to staff. A self-made entrepreneur raised on a South London council estate, Roger now runs BoxFund, a founder-led VC backing impact-driven consumer brands. He's outspoken on venture, politics, and purpose with strong views and a track record to match. In today's episode, we talk about how he went from rags to riches or riches to rags and building back again, taking Boxfresh from a market stall to an exit, doing it again with Boxpark, and how you'd never go on a journey without a destination. So why would you do it if you're in business?
You would never go on a journey in life without knowing the destination. So why would you set up a business and not know your destination?
How the currency of change is capital, and how entrepreneurship is about enjoying the moves in between, not just getting from A to B.
Life is like a dance floor. It's not about getting from A to B as quick as possible. And that was me for, I think, at least 25 years of my entrepreneurial career.
Why we should celebrate the migrant stories here in the UK, and can less be more in venture?
We believe that you can have another way of working with companies. You can do less is more.
Why BoxFund believes in transparency in their term sheets, and why you should zig when others zag.
Look at some of the greatest investors that have ever existed, people like John Templeton and now Warren Buffett. What they do is they zig when everyone else zags. Don't follow the crowd. Be brave enough to do something different.
Let's get straight into it. Hey guys, whilst I've got you here for a second, I thought I'd reintroduce myself. My name's Aarish. I'm the host of Nothing Ventured, the podcast where I talk to the people behind the stories that make the venture ecosystem go round. I'm also the founder of Emerge One, a consultancy that provides fractional CFO support to venture-backed tech startups from seed to Series B and beyond. If you enjoy the podcast, we'd really appreciate it if you could like, rate, and subscribe, whether that's on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple. It really helps us increase our reach. And of course, if you want to talk to me about anything related to the podcast, or indeed want to suggest a guest or anything else, do reach out to me on LinkedIn or Twitter, or X as it's now called. I'll be waiting there. Right, let's get into it. Roger, really great to have you in the studio with me. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you for inviting me.
No, really, really great to have you here. So we're going to dive straight in. Let's talk about streetwear, street food, and the streets of South London. You've built two iconic consumer brands, Boxfresh and then Boxpark. But your story starts really on a council estate in London in the 70s, raised by a single mum after moving from Malaysia. So what drove you then and what drives you now?
Oh, wow. That's a big question. So as you rightly said, I was born in London. My mother was Irish. My father was Malaysian. I guess they eloped. They originally met in Dublin, came to London. My sister was born here and then I followed on. And I spent my early childhood in Malaysia. And unfortunately, that sort of relationship didn't work out for my mum living in KL. And literally, she brought her two young children back to the UK with just the clothes on her back. So it was really bizarre for me because we went from living in, my family were quite wealthy in Malaysia and we had servants and big houses and stuff like that. And I came back to London with literally, as I said, the clothes on my back.
So sort of riches to rags rather than the other way around.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. So... And it was a really difficult time. I was only young and growing up in Britain in the 70s, there was a lot of racism. And, there was times, when the National Front, I think, walked through the streets of Lewisham and my secondary school was on the boundaries of Lewisham. So I don't think I found it easy to assimilate. I was sort of quite different. I was quite a cheeky kid. And I wasn't white and I wasn't black, so I used to get beat up by both black kids and white kids.
But it's interesting because when we first met online, I until you told me that you're half Malaysian, I didn't realize. Now that I see you in person, I can kind of see the ethnicity, if I can put it that way.
Yeah.
But were you noticeably different? Like, did you feel like you were different from your peers and your schoolmates and so on?
I didn't, but
but they did.
But they kept on calling me names like,
yeah.
Really ridiculous names like, Black Magic. And I was like, I'm not black. I'm half Malaysian, half Irish. So I think my early childhood was really defined by a need to sort of fit in. I was sort of growing up, my mum remarried and I grew up in a stable family, but I always felt a bit of an outsider. And frankly, I felt I underachieved when it came to my A-levels. I wanted to be a doctor. I don't think I wanted to be a doctor. I think my mum wanted me to be a doctor, as many sort of, well, you would know that.
Yeah, the Asian dreams,
immigrant sort of parents.
Yeah.
And I was unfortunate. I was a victim of an assault, an unprovoked assault when I was young, and that sort of disrupted my A-levels.
Sorry to hear that.
And but that's life really, growing up in the streets of South London. And so when I came out of university, and I went to university through clearing, did environmental sort of studies, and really I wasn't that interested in it, or I had a limited interest in it. I was more interested in going out clubbing and running clubs. So I spent most of my degree sort of promoting clubs. And I didn't realise that was actually telling me something, that I was more interested in business and entrepreneurship at that time than the environment.
You're the second guest in the last week who's told me exactly the same thing, although he's a lot younger.
There's a lot of us that when I speak to other guys and I go, I used to run clubs at university. So my first 3 jobs straight out of university in advertising, I got sacked in the first 3 jobs. And I basically then came to the conclusion if I didn't employ myself, no one else would. So I set up my first business, Boxfresh, at the age of 22, literally from a market stall. I built that business up over the next 10 or 15 years to one of the largest streetwear brands in Britain. Along the way, I launched brands like Carhartt in the UK, which is a significant brand now. Okay. I launched Penfield in the UK. I was the first guy to bring what is now G-Star into the UK. Fila, countless brands. I was always out there really searching for stuff. And that really was where I cut my sort of... really broke into entrepreneurship and really understood what it took. And eventually, after 15 hard years of building that business up from a market store to maybe a £20 million business, I sold it to a big brand conglomerate who's actually only round the corner.
Well, used to be round the corner.
Yeah,
they've moved now to... where have they moved to? Clerkenwell, that's right. Yeah. I was there a few weeks ago. So obviously what drove you in those early days sounds like a little bit of that kind of immigrant chip, but also kind of need to prove, but also the feeling a bit different, and also maybe, and I had this sort of similar experience, but university was not my finest time. But I couldn't quite understand why I was there, right? Like I couldn't understand what the point was.
What were you studying?
I studied languages, which, but what I realized, I loved languages, but I didn't love studying literature and, 16th century Spanish, whatever. And equally, I also think there's for certain people, and I see this a lot with kind of people that are founders or have that entrepreneurial bend. A lot of them have traits that would sort of be maybe considered ADHD. I don't necessarily know that they are ADHD in and of themselves, but what I tend to see is like you get the structure of school and you can perform really well, and I performed very well at school.
Easily, because it's not that demanding.
It's not that demanding, but then university, you're kind of left to your own devices, you've got to do the stuff yourself. And I was like, well, there's more interesting stuff to be doing than sitting there reading this book, right? So so I found that quite testing, but clearly, to your point, you built from a market stall and then exited, and we'll talk about that kind of Pentland and then sort of BoxPark thereafter. But presumably with maturity and age and a change in circumstances, you're driven by something different now. And you touched on it in the sort of quick fire. It sounds like you're now driven by the future for your kids and for the world and the planet, and which is why you're looking more at kind of the impact side. Is that right?
I guess I'm driven more by purpose, but just sort of relating it back to that early story. I think now what I really understand is when I first set up my first business, and I would challenge a lot of the entrepreneurs that are listening to this to ask themselves this question, that I was really in business for my ego.
Yeah.
What
are you doing it for?
Yeah. Suddenly I was really good at doing something, Boxfresh, and everyone was going, there's the guy that's running Boxfresh and Carhartt. And I'm not sure I was really driven by money necessarily. It was more driven, especially in the fashion world, was even more ego than your normal
profile
industry. Yeah, like where you're selling, they're doing streetwear. There's an element of snobbiness, shall I say, about it, or elitism about it. So, but I think there's the other reasons that entrepreneurs should be in business is really not just your ego, and you've got to be careful about that. It's to make money. And then finally, to make a better world, or to hand it on to your family and future generations. And I think I've gone through that classic cycle. My first business was about ego with Boxfresh. And to a certain, I think my second business, BoxPark, was about money, because I really understood that I wanted to get stability, financial stability for my family. And now I'm in a position where I don't need to work anymore. I choose to work. I'm in business to give for purpose. I'm in business to give things back to entrepreneurs. Why? Because I really like working with entrepreneurs. If I wasn't an entrepreneur, I think as Peter Crouch once famously said, I'd be a virgin. So, it gave me my sense of worth. And also just to leave a legacy of, I've left a bit of a better world. I think the Ephebic Oath says, I shall leave this city better than I found it. I'm sure it says it a lot more eloquently than that. But that's what I feel. I feel there's a bigger purpose. I've done the money bit. What I really want to have on my tombstone is not, here's Roger. He was a see you next Tuesday. He had loads of money, but it was a see you next Tuesday. Here's Roger. He was a nice guy and he left this world a little bit better than he found it. And that's what I'm trying to do by investing in the next generation of consumer brands that will make a better world. Yeah.
I mean, I think about this sort of stuff a lot. I think there's a bit of an Asian flavor, like an Eastern philosophy within this, right? Like a lot of Eastern philosophies take you through these sort of stages of life. And when you get essentially older, you go from, a young person to a householder. And often within these sort of, especially Indian philosophies, you move back to a more, not even religious, but a much more societal kind of philosophy around how you want to live your life and what you're going to do. And it sounds like you're kind of on that stage of the journey. And I want to dig into that a little bit more because, you talked about Boxfresh, you sold to Pentland, but then you built BoxPark and sold it for 8 figures plus. And, you said Boxfresh maybe went too cheap and, I don't know. Pentland possibly got a great deal out of it, but you
always
probably
get a good deal.
Yeah, but you probably got a decent deal as well. But BoxPark was the one that gave you the financial freedom. So what did you learn from each exit? And I guess, and this really comes back to, what is your relationship with enough? Because it sounds like you've made your peace with that.
Yeah, really good question. I think it's fair to say in my first business, I was quite naive about building up value in a business, understanding how you build up value, and the whole sale process of selling on to a major trade buyer, which at that time was to Pentland. So when it came to my second business,
and sorry to interrupt, for the audience that don't know Pentland, they own brands like Speedo, for example.
They're probably a £10 billion plus group. They own a host of brands from Speedo. They used to own Reebok, Berghaus, Hunter. They're also majority shareholder in JD Sports, which, alone, that's probably a £5 billion investment. They've got major interest in Israel, and, they've got your odd oil tanker or two. It's.
I wasn't aware of the oil tanker, and I know the Reebok story, but I'd love to get one of them on to actually tell it themselves. But anyway, sorry, I interrupted you there. But so do carry on.
Yeah. So I think that the second time round, I was much better prepared, and it's so weird for those entrepreneurs that are listening, it's bizarre. You would never go on a journey in life without knowing the destination. So why would you set up a business and not know your destination? So when I'm speaking to young entrepreneurs, the first thing I'm saying to them is, why are you in business? Is it your ego? Because you get people, because you'll get entrepreneurs go, I'm in business, like I just said, to help change the world maybe, or I'm in business because I want to be my own man. I'm in business, they give you a host of different reasons, but all of them somehow
don't want to be an employee or whatever.
They're all one thing, ego.
Yeah.
Because you don't want to be employed because your ego can't deal with that, okay? I admit that. I struggle with that, really struggle with that. So I ask them, look, what really is your destination? I really want to focus on those guys that want to be in business to make money, but also make money in a fair way. So then there's nothing wrong with saying that. I think too many people think that we want to hear as investors that you're in business because, I'm trying to make a better world. Yes, we want to make a better world, but the currency of change is money. So first and foremost, we want the company to perform. If the company performs and we make a better world, that is great. But we have to recognize that that is our destination. So the first part of the journey is understand your destination when you're an entrepreneur. Go, right, I want to be in business for the next 5 to 10 years. In the case of BoxPark, I want to be in business for the next 5 to 10 years, and I want to get an exit that I never have to ever work again. And in the end, it took me 10 years, not 5, but I got to the figure that I wanted to get to. And
did you know? So on that point, did you know that figure? Had you worked it out, or was it like
I worked out
figure?
I worked out the figure along the way.
Yeah.
It got larger as it went along, because your expectations maybe get larger. But what was so different the second time round was I was laser focused on the exit. So certainly in the last 3 years of that business, and you got to remember, I think in the last 3-4 years, we were one of the fastest growing businesses in Britain, according to Sunday Times. It's rare to get in it once. To get in it twice is exceptional. We got it 3 years in a trot before they stopped it because our growth was astronomical. I think we went from 1 million, 2.5 to 5 million EBITDA profit, and likewise the turnover, I think, went from 5 to 10 to 20 over a 3-year period. But that took planning. It didn't happen overnight. We were planning that. I was building, not only were we building the business, we were understanding what it took to get an exit. I was building a team around me. And in the final years, I was building a team around me to make me redundant.
Yeah.
And then,
without which you can't get to an exit, because if
then,
you are fundamental to the business, then there's no value. Yeah. And out of interest, because it would strike me that these are two very different, like BoxFresh was, to your point, was fashion brands. BoxPark, I mean, it's iconic. Camden, Wembley, Shoreditch obviously was, I think, the first, right? Yes. Now, these are like retail outlets almost, right? They're I mean, I don't even know how you would describe them, because they're not a shopping mall.
Pop-up mall.
Yeah. They're
pop-up development.
Exactly, right? But So were there corollaries in terms of how you built those like were there learnings from BoxFresh that you could port across to BoxPark, or was it a completely different endeavor?
I think Steve Jobs once famously said that it's about connecting up the dots of your life. So what led to the creation of BoxPark and even the creation of now BoxFund was connecting up the dots of my life. So let's start with, coming out of university, being a bit of an entrepreneur, being the kid that used to run the tuck shop or promoting clubs at university, having an interest in fashion, and then off the back of the growth of streetwear, because we were one, if not the first 2 or 3 British streetwear brands out there, we grew off the back of that. And then moving on, connecting the dots with BoxPark, when I was at BoxFresh, I built a container store.
Interesting.
And then at the same time, I really believe in physical retail. I still believe in physical retail. I actually believe that the consumer and the financiers they're writing off physical retail because they believe everything's going to be online. I don't. I believe that shopping online is always a compromise to buying in a store.
Well, and we saw that, right? Because in COVID, it went up 15%. And everyone thought that was going to stick, but it didn't.
No. Well, at the same time, until you can go online, you can touch and feel that product, it's always going to be inferior.
Yeah.
And I think you can argue that you can get more cost-efficient traffic now in store than you can online with the now cost per clicks. And then finally, conversion is 10 times better. You can convert at 1 in 10 customers typically in store
drop-offs
as opposed to 1 in 100.
Yeah.
So the demise of the high street, or the so-called demise, is ridiculous. It's almost as though we're believing. I actually could see a bounce back for the high street, but we've got to believe in it and we've got to protect it. But anyway, let's not go there. So what I did believe was physical retail, okay? So really, and I already built a container shop, and I happened to have a mate that ran a retail development. So I just connected up those dots. I built, and I also was a buy-to-let landlord. I had a few buy-to-let properties. So I just had a love of containers. I believed in physical retail, and my mate ran a retail development in America, and I thought if he could do it, I can do it. So I built what was the world's first pop-up mall in Shoreditch. I was lucky to find the land, okay? But the bit about me was that I've been formed by creating 1,000 products a year from running a streetwear brand. So my mind was ingrained into creating products. My mind was ingrained into never copying anyone, because copying in the streetwear game is a total no-no, because you get called out. Oh, look at Boxfresh, they're copying so-and-so.
Yeah.
So we were always inventing product. So as a result of that, when I came to what was relatively a sleepy industry, retail development, no one really did anything in that industry. Nothing really changes in it. I was really open up for change. So
you changed the playbook.
Totally. And it didn't necessarily come out of success. It came out of failure. So when we first set up BoxPark, it was built for the Olympics, for retail. And we had all of these huge clients signed up, people like Nike, people like Diesel, people like North Face. We had them all. And they wanted to have 5-year leases. And I said no. I went because I thought the rents, I thought it would be a real success. And actually, after a year, half of them left us. So I was faced with this catastrophic situation that I didn't have enough money coming in, and what could we do? So we went into shorter term rentals, and then over time we pivoted away, not from streetwear, but into street food, because accidentally it was the food court that I put on top of BoxPark as an accident that took off. Yeah. And then the next big major change for BoxPark was when Hackney licensing said, we're going to take away all the licenses of all your tenants upstairs because we're concerned about underage drinking, unless you as the landlord take over the alcohol license and run it. And reluctantly I did that, but it turned out to be the greatest move possible for our company. So the way I approach business is that it's continually evolving. I'm never frightened of change. I love change. I love disruption. I love creating things. And as a result of that, our businesses have evolved and grown and are constantly changing. We've just launched I still own 25% of BoxPark. We just launched the new BoxHall concept, which is an upmarket concept in Liverpool Street, which is, I think 10 or 12 kitchens where we provide the kitchens. We get the best chefs to go in there. And it's a much more upmarket experience.
It's almost like a dark kitchen,
but open to the public. Yeah.
That's amazing. And so going back to that kind of question about relationship with enough. So it sounds like you got there, right? But do you think that was purely down to the planning, or do you think also, and again, this comes back to ego, right? Because I know lots of entrepreneurs that have made a ton of money, but are back on the saddle, and maybe they're doing it for different reasons now. Maybe they've now got the freedom to build what they would have built the first time round. Maybe, it kind of depends. But did you get to that point where like, I'm satisfied, or did that come afterwards?
After having a period of reflection from selling BoxPark and reaching my dreams, and that story that's a great story as well, because literally I was selling BoxPark over COVID and literally about to sign the deal, and the deal of my lifetime, and then COVID came along, and I was just literally, oh my god,
timing could not,
But Sorry, I forgot where I was there.
No, so this is about the relationship with enough.
Yeah. Okay. So, and then after that, I took a bit of time off. I went back to business school and had a period of reflection. And, I also see a therapist, and I strongly advise for people to see therapists if they feel that they need to.
I endorse that sentiment.
Yeah, we work on our bodies. Why not work on our brains? And I wanted to be the best possible person. And I realized that my natural tendency is always to chase something. The monkey in my brain wants to chase something. And what I really wanted to do was really calm my brain. And when I really started to get success in my latter years at BoxPar was because I was very calm, very, focused. And I really started to go within, and I started to realize I had a natural tendency to always want to chase things. And I had to control that monkey in my brain, and I was in control of my mind. My mind wasn't in control of me. Classic Eckhart Tolle, or effectively, let's go back to Hinduism and Buddhism and whatever. It's just about controlling your mind, and I think one really big line for me was I've got enough, and I have to say that. So nowadays, I only work 3 days a week. I work Tuesday, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. I work pretty hard those days, pretty full on. But I don't work 4 days a week. Why? Because that's my coping mechanism. Because I go, that's where I work. And when I go back to our country house or whatever, that's where I switch off, play golf, spend time with the family, which are now my focus and my priority than making money.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's so a couple of things. So firstly, the mind body stuff, 100%. Having, I've talked about it on the podcast before, did therapy for a couple of years, learned a huge amount about myself, shed a lot of just anger and grief and, the things that you shed and the things that you hold on to. And I think actually, it really struck me when you're talking about that kind of calmness. So again, and I think a lot of entrepreneurs have that kind of monkey, what's the next thing? And, I had to, I remember when I came back to the UK in 2015, one of the guys I worked with, lovely guy called Raheem, he goes, Aarish, stop trying to do all these things, do one thing. And then, built a business, try to build another business, then the podcast, and then I'm writing a book. And he's like, just Aarish, just do one thing. And I think that's very difficult, right? To not get kind of taken down the rabbit hole of looking at the next thing, right? And focusing on the one thing. And I think the other thing about, the kind of being calm, it's really interesting because I've noticed that certainly about myself, because I was a really frantic type person for the early kind of 10, 15 years of my career. I now notice how calm I am in circumstances and situations where I would not have been calm in the past, right? And I just know, reaction to a client being annoyed with us, or, someone having done the wrong thing. I just don't take it in the same way. And I think that only comes with experience, maturity, and, to your point, having learned those lessons, I think both at Boxfresh and at BoxPark, to understand yourself enough to be able to say, okay, these are the things that potentially trigger me into these behaviors. But actually, if I look at it from a very, very rational and calm perspective, from a calm perspective, I'm no longer reacting to, I am, I'm working with the situation. And I think, again, also, obviously you're very fortunate, and most people, I would imagine, listening to this podcast are not yet in a place where, they can do the 3 days a week. But I've always said, what is money if not a proxy for time, right?
Yeah.
And if
time is your most precious commodity.
100%, right? And if you're not spending your time doing the things that you actually love doing, and look, and if you love running businesses and if you love doing it, then great, do that. But if you can leverage your money to give you time to do the things that are truly valuable to you, I think that's the goal. And
sorry, I just want to add something to that. I think a couple of traits that somebody once said to me, or maybe I learned it from somewhere. It was, life is like a dance floor, It's not about getting from A to B as quick as possible. And that was me for, I think, at least 25 years of my entrepreneurial career and driving everyone mad around me. You know, it's about the moves in between, enjoying the moves in between. And I know it sounds really cliche, but it was weird for me because I spent my whole life trying to get to the top of this mountain to realize, which was financial security, to realize I was always at the top of that mountain.
Yeah.
And I know you hear so many people, and people are going to be there going, oh, yeah, it's all right for you to say. But money doesn't define you. And I had everything I wanted before, you know, the sale. I really did. I had you know, my family were doing well. We had a modest house, you know, and, you know, we had a nice life. We did whatever we want. Yes, we've got a bigger house now, and we got bigger bills, but I'm no happier. And it's weird because
it's that marginal utility of a dollar.
It doesn't make you happy. I know it sounds cliche, but I just want people to listen to my own personal story that, you know, I find myself most days I go for a nap, and I have a nap in a shepherd's hut. It's in our grounds, and I love it. And do you know what that does? It reminds me that if I lose everything, I could just live in this shepherd's hut because I love this shepherd's hut. It's got my double bed. It's got a fire in it. It's got a nice bath in it. I can cook in it, and it opens up into the field. And I think Jack Dorsey does something similar. I think at one stage, Jack Dorsey was wearing 7 T-shirts, 1 pair of jeans, 1 pair of trainers, and a jacket every 3 months, and that's all he wore. Yeah. And he had rice and water, and he was practicing Stoicism. And there's actually real strength in that, because what it was teaching him was, I don't need anything else. Yeah. Actually, that's not going to make me happy. Those possessions are not going to make me happy. And there is a part of me that really craves a simple life and just recognizing we've got enough. And there's a lot of families out there. And yes, the day-to-day struggle is really hard. You know, my wife's family come from a very humble background. They're working class, as we were, from Birmingham, you know, but they've got a fantastic family network. You know, you never hear them really complaining. So I think we do get obsessed with, you know, trying to reach goals in life. But the most important goal in life, my goals at the moment is, I think I could define them, is my health. Well, there's no point to anything else if I die tomorrow. My relationships, you know, of course, in order of my family, my wife, my children, my friends, extended family, whatever, my colleagues, improving my relationships, because that's always work in progress. And then finally, just leaving this world a little bit better than I found it. And obviously there's a bit of golf in there as well. You know, but look, it's the first two that everyone can have. You know. Yeah. No, look,
I think you and I have very, very similar philosophies on life. And I
want to add something else. Sorry to interrupt.
No, go on.
And it's something that we don't hear enough. And, you know, I'm in a fortunate position that I have a lot of Indian friends, okay? And I know all of those Indian friends are British, okay? And we know what it's like to be born in Britain, and no matter what, we are British. Forget about our immigrant background. We are first and foremost British. No different than the Irish coming over here in the early days, or the Windrush generation coming over here. You know, say to Saka, you're not British. Yeah. You know, we're British, okay?
Well, it happened yesterday. Everyone's saying Rishi Sunak, he's not. But,
I mean, well, it's just disgraceful. But anyway, the reason why I'm saying this, I don't think enough credit is given to, I think the Indian community in Britain is incredible. I love the family network that they have. I love the contribution that the Indian community has made to Britain. My own community is half Irish and half Chinese Malaysian. I think we've made an incredible community. But when we first came to this country, we didn't have the benefit of that doubt, you know. And yes, at the moment, I think particularly people of Muslim origin are getting a very, very difficult time. There's a lot of Islamophobia. And I'm really careful not to judge them, because I think that, you know, fundamentally they're like us. They're British, you know, and let's not evaluate people by their colour or their religion or whatever. Let's just accept that Britain is a great multicultural country. And, you know, look, if you're Anglo-Saxon and Christian, great, you're of British heritage, but you don't own Britain. You know, Britain is a multicultural country, and it's amazing, you know, I want to give credit. It's amazing what, in particular, the Indian community have brought to Britain and the richness that's brought. And that's difficult for you to say because you're not Indian, but looking from the outside, I think I can say it. It's incredible. And I think you've made this country a much better country. And I think there's incredible opportunities for Britain to work with India now, you know. And a lot of us don't really understand. We won't get into it. We don't understand the culture of the fact that actually Britain's wealth was built off India. But let's not go there.
Yeah, I mean, like, there's a lot. There would be a lot of like untangleable or tangleable and untangleable topics that come out. No, look, I mean, look. Putting aside Indian or not Indian, I think migrants built this country, or have, you know, certainly over the last century, have contributed to the building of this country. You know, in much the same way that migrants do that the world over, right? Because migrants are often
America.
I mean, America, you know, literally a country built by migrants. But, you know, the reality is that migrants, you know, often are the ones who will come, will do the jobs, et cetera, et cetera. And look, we're going to get into a couple of these topics in a second. We're not necessarily in that direction. But firstly, thank you for making the kind of statements and comments that you did. I certainly agree that I think, you know, if you can point to whether it's the Indian, whether it's the Hong Kong Chinese, whether it's Malaysian, Singaporean communities, and obviously these are all ex-colonies. Irish for sure. Caribbean, African. Jamaican, African, Nigerian, Kenyan. I mean, I'm East African Indian. Like, you know, these are people that came to these shores probably as economic migrants at the time, rather than, you know, refugees or
many of them were invited here.
Yeah, absolutely.
We should forget that.
Yeah. And, you know, slogged away. They, you know, ran the corner shop, or they built the restaurant, or whatever it was. And they put their kids through school. Their kids then became the doctors, you know, or the lawyers, or the bankers, or whatever. And look, that's just the progression. That's the way it works. And I think, yeah, look, I think from my perspective, I've always loved being a Londoner, especially a Londoner. You know, whether someone else chooses to call me British or English or not, I'm a Londoner. And part of the beauty of being a Londoner is just being able to walk out on the street and see so many diverse kind of people. And diversity doesn't necessarily even just mean color of skin or whatever. Like, you could see 5 quote unquote Caucasians, you know, walking down the street. You'll have an Italian, an Irishman, you know, a Brit or whatever, all having a conversation. I think that's a beautiful thing. But I want to move into these couple of slightly controversial topics.
I like being controversial.
I did notice that, Roger. I mean, that's
I want to be.
I mean, that's how we kind of met each other on LinkedIn.
Because before you move on, let's not talk about the elephant in the room. You know, we could be on the verge of a anti-immigration party, the Reform Party, being the next government of this country.
At least opposition, if not government. Yeah. No, look, I mean...
And we could be on that verge. And I never thought we would go there. So what I want to remind the viewers out there is guys like me and Aarish, who are both of immigrant parents, you know, and we feel more British than I certainly feel more British than your average British person. I go to lots of rugby games, football games. I'm avid about England as a team. I love Britain as a country. I recognise everything it gave me. But let's start to put a more positive slant on what immigrants have brought to this country, rather than all the negative slants that we ever hear. We never hear about the positivity. And then before we know it, we wake up and suddenly we got Brexit, you know?
Yeah. Look, and again, I could go into a lot of detail. I'm like, you know, my wife is Italian. We, you know, now British as well, because, you know, post-Brexit, we kind of figured we needed to get that done. But I used to joke, so when I used to live in New Guinea and Australia, there was a lot of Australians. Australians are beautiful people, but you get a few bigots, right? Of
course, you get that everywhere.
You get that everywhere. But I used to joke whenever, you know, someone would come and say something relatively sort of odd to me. I'd say, mate, I'm
racist.
Racist.
You're being too polite.
I am being polite. But I'd say, well, I'm more English than any of you. I'm East African Indian. I was born in Mombasa. I was brought up in London. I've lived in Papua New Guinea. I've lived in Australia, and
you've created wealth for this country.
Yeah,
and employment.
that's 5 times more English or British than the guy who's just kind of grown up in the one place. Right?
How many jobs would you estimate your family's created in Britain? I'm talking about uncles. I'm talking about direct family.
Oh shit! I mean, like thousands. I get hundreds, if not thousands.
Thousands of jobs.
Yeah, I mean, again, you're getting into like lots of different areas, but I have, my brother-in-law is a CFO at a $5 billion fund. That's going to have created a few jobs. My family's businesses here would have probably hired, 50, 100 people, whatever that number is. I have 30 people in my team.
I had 500 people at BoxPark.
Well, I'm trying to get there. I'm trying to give me a few more years. I might get there soon. But look, maybe not thousands, but certainly, certainly low hundreds. But I think the point is, again, what it all comes back to, and I think migrant populations have this tendency towards entrepreneurship, often because it's the only thing they can do when they first reach the shores of a new country. Like they have to build. It's not a. I can't remember now directly the quote, but it's not a choice. It's a necessity, right? Which means that they build stuff. They have to build stuff, whether it's a corner shop or, whether it's the Romanian guy who's built the construction business, or whether it's, someone who's come up and set up the restaurant, right? This is the nature of the migrant experience. And it's, by the way, it's no coincidence that 62%, I think it is, of venture-backed companies in the US are founded by migrants. I mean, it's just the reality. But, one of the things that you have been open about is your disdain for kind of traditional VC. You've called it spray and pray. You've even
Ponzi scheme.
You've compared it to Ponzi schemes. So what's fundamentally, from your perspective, what's fundamentally broken in the model, and how does BoxFund aim to fix it?
Okay. Well, firstly, recognize that most VCs, their only concern about a return on investment. Okay. So let's take a traditional small VC fund comparable to ours. So they maybe are looking to raise £10 million, and what they would typically do is they would write 20 checks of about £500,000 each. They'll have 20 deals, and they might have a follow-up fund of another 10 million, and they'll go into 10 of those companies, or maybe 5 of those companies, and they will invest another 1 million or 2 million. Okay. But they'll hardly ever join the board. Okay. It's more like spread betting, I guess. It's almost like going, right, okay, we'll make those investments, we'll let them do whatever they want to do, and then we'll just back the winners, and they hope that maybe 1 or 2 of those businesses will give them a 20x. They're obsessed with this sort of big ticket sort of size. Well, firstly, we reject that. We believe that you can have another way of working with companies. You can do less is more. I think that's what Jerry Maguire once famously said at the beginning. Less clients, but working more caring with your clients. So we believe in doing less. We believe in being hands-on and taking operational value. Just this morning, I was on the phone with one of our investments, Nude, and we're talking to the Italian factory about some new things. That's the sort of level that we get involved with. I speak to Keir from Nude regularly every week. So the first thing to say is the point of difference. Then the next thing that we notice is with VCs, they're like sheep, okay? And the investment industry is like sheep. I love to go into an industry and just drop grenades and disrupt it. I have to do that. Because if I've got nothing else to offer, then there's no point me going into it. So, what VCs would do is they chase the latest fad, whether it's AI at the moment or, fintech before, or, whatever it was before that, tech or whatever. But, there's some really good strong businesses that will always do well that they ignore. So one of the sectors that they really have got a red line through at the moment is consumer brands. But Britain has created some of the greatest consumer brands in the world. We're a nation of shopkeepers. We've got a fantastic test bed to work with some of the most sophisticated retailers. So we really believe in focusing on what we're good at. So we reject that idea of just following the sheep, doing what everyone else does. And what also people don't realize is they do a lot of deals with each other. So literally, because they do so many deals, you get a call from another VC and they go, oh, will you co-invest alongside me? They don't bring in a lot of necessarily new capital to business. They do a lot of deals. It's like a cozy little network of these are the people.
Club.
It's a boys' club, okay? And unfortunately it is as well. So we reject that idea, and we fundamentally reject the idea that it's not risk capital. So you'll also get VCs that will introduce certain clauses like liquidity preference shares, and they'll say words. It'll be in the fine detail. They'll say things like, "Oh, we've got 3 times liquidity preference shares," which effectively means that they have to get their money out before any other investor gets out.
3 times their money out.
3 times their money out before any other investor does, and that prejudices other investors. So we don't believe in that. We believe in a transparent term sheet. We believe in dealing fairly with all of our businesses. We invest in consumer brands where other people don't invest in consumer brands. We believe that we should be bringing in new capital to the businesses. We believe that it's risk capital that we're doing, okay? And we're not really looking to do co-investment deals with other companies. And you got to a stage at one stage where it was just ridiculous valuations where, it was like a Ponzi scheme from selling to the venture capital will sell to private equity or sell to another private equity, whatever. And eventually one day there might, if you're lucky,
we haven't moved out of that.
An IPO.
Yeah.
It's certainly changed. It's massively changed post Silicon Valley Bank, disappearing. Or Innovation Bank, this has now been taken over by HSBC Innovation Bank. I think you're getting to a stage of more realistic valuations. So we believe in being fair with the entrepreneurs. We're only focused on consumer brands. We're focused on impact consumer brands. That's the way we're going to pay a fair valuation. It's not going to be all the odds just in our favor.
So I don't necessarily think. So to be slightly contrarian to your view, I think the best VCs would see it exactly the same as you do.
Oh, they'll say it.
No, I mean I think a lot of them will also do. Well, some of them will also do it. But I don't disagree that there has been lots of pretty awful behavior within the ecosystem. And I mean, like I've seen term sheets where, founders, you're going to be tied to a £50,000 salary until the business exits. And I'm like, well, hold on a second. How the hell are you going to enforce that? Like that could be 10 years from now. You're going to keep, or
they'll dilute the entrepreneur down to nothing.
Yeah. Or we see this regularly, right? Founders being, down at sort of sub 30, sub 30, 20% even.
Or bring in so much debt into the company that the company can't raise its own debt, and as a result, the founders have to dilute.
Yeah, I mean, so there are definitely funds out there that are not great practitioners. I think we've had, and I would hope that the VCs that we have had on the podcast today would typically fall into that category of being more founder friendly. I think most of the VCs that I speak to on this podcast,
but they'll all say it, won't they?
Well, they will, but I've worked with a lot of them as well,
Yeah.
and I'd say they for the most part will practice what they preach, right? But equally, the most reflective of them are the ones that do realize that, well, if I'm on a board, I've got to put in the work, but I've got to put in the work that I can put in, not the work that I want to be seen to be doing, but the work that I actually have competence in doing, right? Or, really being not only, good fiduciaries and custodians, but also helping the founders, get, and it goes back to your point, like, what is that journey? Is it A to B, or is it something else?
But they can't afford to do it. So take a £10 million fund.
Yeah,
Okay.
sure.
So the average for those people out there, the mechanism in terms of the way it works is you usually get paid 2% annual management fee. This is the usual.
Yeah.
And you might get 20% carry, 20% of the profits that you make for your investor. If you've got a £10 million fund and you're making, say, 20 deals, right?
And it's 2% per annum, by the way.
Per annum, yeah. And you've got £200,000 coming in. That's not going to pay pay for the office,
Yeah.
So as a result of that, you can't really get involved with that many deals. And we've got a situation, and let me be clear, I'm not saying all VCs are bad.
Yeah, sure.
I'm saying there's a lot of VCs out there that I don't agree with their practices.
No, I completely agree, yeah.
And you've also got some funds out there that literally they've raised 1, 200, 300, 400 million. They've never had an exit in their life. Because if you think of it, if you raise a £100 million fund, you got £20 million you got £2 million of fees coming in that door.
No, over 10 years, which is 20 million. Yeah,
20 million.
I mean, so 100%, like, the incentives start becoming misaligned, right? And it becomes an AUM game, right? So that you're chasing more assets under management, or more cash under management, essentially.
So we don't charge an annual management fee.
So you've got zero management fees, right?
No, we do charge an upfront fee.
Yeah.
But effectively, when you look at our fees, it's less than 50% of what anyone else would charge.
Yeah. And you are an EIS fund at the moment, is that right? Okay. So do you raise from retail LPs, or are they more traditional LPs but looking for EIS?
Okay. So for those listeners out there, you've got some funds which effectively they'll raise a pot of money.
Yeah.
So let's say 10 million,
Yeah.
and then they'll deploy that amongst 20 companies. With ourselves, we focus on deal by deal.
Okay.
So when we have a potential investment, we usually underwrite the total investment round that they require, and we raise all the money. And once we've done that, we move on to the next deal. So we don't adopt the spray and pray attitude.
Yeah. So you don't have capital waiting to be deployed as such.
We literally raise capital on a per deal basis. And in our case, that's the way our entrepreneurs like it, because they believe they can also pick the winners.
Yeah.
They go, well, yeah, I like chewing gum, but I don't like that one, or whatever, plant-based gum, and I don't like this one.
Yeah.
So it gives them the opportunity to do that.
Yeah.
But I'm not here to plug that anyway.
No, that's I
want to talk about controversial shit.
Let's get to the real reason I wanted you on the on the podcast.
Because we haven't got long now.
No, exactly. So let's
warmed me up.
Let's talk about it. Brexit bullshit and speaking up. You've become increasingly vocal, I'd say, and an increasingly vocal critic of the UK's political direction, from Brexit to the way founders are treated. You've even emailed 2 million BoxPark customers before the Brexit vote. Why do you think that more founders don't speak out, and how has your political awakening sort of shaped your view of business?
Wow.
And where do you see us going from now? Because
not too many questions. This brain can't cope with it.
No, I'm sure it can, from what I can tell. But like one of the really core conversations at the moment is, where is the UK headed?
I mean, firstly, Aarish, I'm really annoyed. Okay. Because it shouldn't be down to people like me to speak up on those people on behalf of those people that can't speak up. Sure. So first and foremost, I was never really political. I was the sort of guy that would go, oh, come on, let's just give the politics a rest and let's talk about something jovial.
I'd say I was the same, and that changed dramatically as well for me.
And Brexit for me was just a massive awakening, because when I ran BoxFresh, I was producing clothing in maybe half a dozen countries and maybe selling to over 20 countries, including mostly Europe. So I could see firsthand the benefits of being part of the European Union created for our country. And the reality is, I thought it was the single largest act of economic self-harm that this country has done to itself in all the time that I'd been running businesses. I could not be clearer about this. You got sold a wrong bill of goods. It was appealing to your emotions of taking back control.
Yep.
But from a pure rational perspective, it was the worst decision that could ever happen.
But this was the problem. It was never so like people buy emotions, and that's why it voted through.
Yeah, but unfortunately, I like to think I'm a bit more rational than that, and I hate the rhetoric at the moment of, well, it's done, let's just get on with it. That's not the way we work in business. When we work in business, we make a mistake, we're brave enough to solve it and move on. So let's be clear, the current economic problems that the UK face at the moment can be directly related to Brexit. I would say it's the largest act, as I said before, of economic self-harm that this country has ever done in my living history, okay? And I think they're saying that there's 150 billion in lost GDP each year, which equates to maybe like 40 to 50 billion of lost tax revenue. And that's according to the OBR, and that's according to Bloomberg. And I trust them more than the Express.
It'll be 4% within over 14 years.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
Okay, so I had this awakening, and I was just expecting for our politicians to present an argument. And when they didn't present an argument, that's when I started. I firstly wrote to 2 million people. I'd love people to look on my LinkedIn, and I'll show you the letter that I wrote, 6-8 years ago now, I think, where I warned of the potential damage, warned that it would lead to loss of jobs amongst the manufacturing industry and the car industry and the potential repercussions of that. So what not enough people are talking about is the current economic problems that we face are not entirely due to Brexit, but they're a large part of it.
Sure.
And probably the simplest thing that we could do to build up investor confidence and rebuild this economy is rejoin the European single market. Notice I've not said the European single union or European Union, which was what we were meant to do with soft Brexit. That's what Theresa May wanted to do. So I fundamentally believe that we should be rejoining the single market, not just for the economy, because from an economical perspective, you can't be a little island by itself. Britain we're little Britain.
We're not what we were 150 years ago.
Just get over it. You're either just, wake up and smell the salt. You might not like to hear it, but the truth is you're either with the big boys or you're outside of it. So there's three current big boys. There is America, there is Europe, and there's China.
Yeah.
And clearly we can't be with America at the moment. They're showing what it's like to not be part of. Well,
they're going through their own Brexit.
Yeah, effectively.
We just haven't quite figured out what
with
it is.
Trump tariffs and their ridiculous own, that's going to hurt America more than anyone else. We now need to pick a side. Sorry, that's it. And I believe that we are closer to Europe. Certainly, my followers on LinkedIn believe it. I think I did a recent post. I think it was 90% wanted to have a closer allegiance with Europe than with the US. We need to pick a side, and we need to pick a bed and lie in it. And that at the moment is Europe, because it's the largest market. We can't afford to be outside of that market.
But let me, I mean, I'm not going to push back on your premise because I fundamentally agree with it. But what I will push back on, or what I would love for you to at least, give me your thinking on is, we're in a situation where no politician wants to talk about Brexit.
Because they're playing politics.
Yeah, but no politician wants to have to deal with that because they just understand, or at least believe, that that's going to be anathema or disaster at the polls in the future. And until someone can although the Lib Dems are, as an example.
But they also need to be more vocal.
Yeah, they need to be more vocal, but they also need to get, essentially, for them to be effective, they would need to have more seats, more power. But really what you've got is the two major parties not wanting to talk about it. And
they're playing politics. Look, I was invited to meet Keir Starmer before he was elected as part of the Creators for Labour movement. I met Keir, and one of the things that I was very explicit with Keir, because he wanted my support on LinkedIn. Of course he didn't need it. I'm only a little, cog in his world. But I did say to him clearly that, look, I've been a Labour supporter most of my life. I will support Labour in the next election, but my line in the sand is we have to rejoin the European single market. And he clearly said to me at that moment that, Roger, I've always been anti-Brexit, and of course we will want to rejoin the European single market. 2 weeks later, he gives an interview to the Sunday Express. It was on the front page, and he said, we've got no intention of rejoining
that was
the European Union and the single market. I don't know why he did that. Whoever
he boxed himself in.
Yeah, it was ridiculous. He didn't need to say that.
For sure.
You know, so Keir, you need to grow some balls. We need...
I don't think he listens to his podcast.
I don't care. I'll just, you know... A leader leads, doesn't follow. Stop playing politics, start leading. This country needs to make some hard, difficult decisions. We are at rock bottom in terms of investor confidence, in terms of the economy at the moment. We're going the wrong way. We got people like you talking about maybe leaving the country, okay, which is disastrous. God knows how many people are left already. And we need to make the right decisions for the country, not for getting into power.
Yeah.
And when he said he was going to come into power, he said, country first, party second. Do what you said you were going to do. Put our country first, and you'll get my vote again. Until then, I'll announce exclusively on this, I'd be voting Liberal Democrat, because I believe nothing matters more than rejoining the European Union to get our economy going again. And the economy is directly related to social services and all of the things that we need. So, look, I won't be voting Labour until they announce they'll be rejoining the single market.
So I mean, I've been a lifelong centrist, so Lib Dems have been kind of my home. Look, not moving away from the politics, but I think the problem is we're in this sort of intractable position now because we've boxed ourselves into the corner of we won't.
Well, he boxed
himself into the corner of we won't rejoin at any cost. You've got reform absolutely nipping at the heels.
Your reform saying whatever they need to say to get in power, forgetting the fact that Nigel Farage was the instigator of Brexit, which has been disastrous for this economy.
But this is
and
the
the likes of Rupert Lowe, who are just an out and out racist.
Well, I mean, I can't even begin to tell you how awful my experience on Twitter or X or whatever has been for the last 6 months, just from that one thing. But I think the thing that I can't reconcile, or maybe don't want to reconcile, is there does seem to be this grassroots movement in the UK for a party like Reform, and I won't colour all voters with one brush, and I don't think it's fair to do that, and I don't think it's right to do that.
Spit it out.
Yeah, but there will be a not insignificant number of those people that would consider voting for Reform, that would vote for Reform because of its anti-migrant and anti sort of, or its nationalist stance, if I can put it that way. And I don't know that you're ever going to convince those people.
People are voting Reform because they've been promised something.
Yeah.
Whether it's truthful or not, they've been promised. I don't blame anyone for voting Reform. They'll pick some emotive subjects like rape gangs in the north of England, and they will pick at people's emotions about that. They won't put it into context that there's a much bigger issue with the Church of England. Christian white people's abuse against young boys, then there certainly was.
I think it's 6% of grooming gangs were proven to have been Muslim focused.
And also there's statistically a less chance of actually committing crime, or certainly a sexual offense, if you're Muslim than a non-Muslim. Okay, so, but what they do, and I totally understand why people want to vote Reform, they just promise you something. Whether it's truthful or not, they promise you something. It's populism, okay? You know, it's the 3 Ps: populism, polarization, and post-truth. The post-truth is almost created. It doesn't matter whether it's true or not, okay? I just promise you the world. If it polarizes everyone, that's great, and it doesn't matter whether it's true. That's Donald Trump. So Farage is playing the Donald Trump book, okay? But it's time now for the big boys to speak up, the people that really understand that our problems are not answered with it's just the immigrants' fault. The reality is we need positive immigration for this country to be successful.
Yeah.
But no one speaks up enough about the power of positive immigration. They'll speak up about grooming gangs, but they won't speak up about the wonderful work that the Indian community have done, the fact that Irish have come to this country initially to work in the construction trade and have revolutionized it, the fact that, you know, Caribbeans were invited here in the Windrush generation, and they seem to conveniently forget, and I'm not sort of stereotyping here, that we wouldn't have a football team unless we had the Windrush generation.
Sure.
So we are a beautiful multicultural society. I, for one, am not going anywhere. I just want to see Britain succeed. That's all I want. I want a great economy. I want us to all live together. I want us to judge everyone, not by the colour of their skin or our religion or our sex or our sexual inclination, but by the strength of our character. And I want to stop going to places like Paris and being embarrassed that Paris is now overtaking London as a financial city. You know, first and foremost, I'm British and I'm proud to be British, and I'm a son of an immigrant parents. You know, and let's start speaking up for those silent majority out there that are like myself.
Yeah. No, look, I mean, I'm not going to argue with any of that. And I think that's a great place to kind of wrap up the podcast. I would normally ask what your contrarian opinion is, but I think we've had a few of those. So what is one contrarian opinion that you have, either from work, politics, life, or at home?
Well, I mean, in terms of, I won't say one, but as you probably would guess, in terms of business, don't be like sheep.
Yeah.
You know, if you look at some of the greatest investors that have ever existed, people like John Templeton and now Warren Buffett, what they do is they zig when everyone else zags. Don't follow the crowd. Be brave enough to do something different, because actually those investors like John Templeton, who invested into America post the Depression, who invested into Japan post the war, into Korea post-war, Germany, have been the best investors and the most astronomical returns out of any investors. And actually I think they just did a recent thing that the only billionaire investor at the moment that's doing well or top 10 richest people in Britain in the world is Warren Buffett, and he's been contrarian.
Yeah.
So don't be scared to be contrarian, okay? For Christ's sakes, don't be scared to stand up for your values, because the next thing that happens is that you've got a Nazi party in, or you got Reform Party in, or you got Brexit, or you got Trump. Because the silent majority said, but what can I do?
Yeah.
Well, we can do a lot, because I'm certainly no politician, but I've chosen to try and create a better world for my children, because I don't want to see Britain destroyed. And then we've got the ridiculous situation at the moment that everyone seems to think that Trump, you know, that it's terrible to be woke. You know, they don't even know the definition of woke. Woke was a phrase that was created which said woke was being protective about racism, particularly against black people in America. And there's nothing woke about caring about the environment. What's the point of having all this money and a great economy if we don't have a world to live in?
Yeah. I guess I want to finish off with one final question. Maybe a more human question. So what I'd love to understand is, what is one thing that moves you emotionally?
I wake up most days being really scared about the future of our world, with the likes of alpha males like Donald Trump, Putin, and Netanyahu. For me, I consider those to be the worst type of individuals that ever have existed. They are the battle that human beings face is a battle between their animal instincts and their humanity. And when you allow your mind to be taken over by your animal instincts, which are, the survival of the fittest, I'm going to win at all costs. That's when we're the most ugliest. When we're at the most beautiful is when we have people like Gandhi, Mandela, people that realize it's our humanity that defines us as human beings. And let's remember that humanity. Let's care about people. Let's put our differences to one side. Let's put our prejudices, whatever they are, to one side and realize we've got a beautiful planet and that we're a beautiful race. And let's believe that we don't live in a hostile world. We live in a beautiful world, as Einstein said. That's the biggest choice that you're ever going to make in life. Do you live in a hostile world or a friendly world? They were literally one of the last words that Einstein said. And that's the greatest thing that we have to ask in life. Don't give in to that animal instinct.
I think that's a very poignant place to leave the podcast. But Roger, thank you so much for joining me. For our audience, where can they find you online? You're clearly on LinkedIn.
Only on LinkedIn. I won't touch anything else.
Okay.
Because you can have a sensible conversation there and you don't hide behind a troll account.
Johnny, lots of numbers and a fake avatar. Well, look, Roger, thank you so much for joining me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you.